Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon in Atlanta, maybe in the morning if you're joining us on the West Coast. But thank you to all who are joining us today for this incredible program. My name is Lane Convulcani. I'm the Director of Alumni Learning and Signature Programs with Emory Alumni Association. Very excited to be joined with two incredible Emory thought leaders talking about work life today. Obviously, we are still combating a global pandemic, and things are morphing into this unknown territory. And that is one of the biggest places that is being felt is in our workplace. So obviously we've had incredible stresses in life and work, and we're trying to balance those and manage them. Sometimes we're doing a great job, sometimes we're not doing a great job. But we wanted to bring these two experts together to talk about the ramifications of some of these elements in society, especially those elements that have affected working parents, different sectors of society, working remotely, those who are being impacted with family experiences and work experiences. And a lot of that stress has culminated in what has been called the Great Resignation. So this is a very pivotal time in our workforce, and we're excited to have you joining us. Two pieces of housekeeping I wanted to share with you. This is being recorded, so if you have to step away from your device at any point, don't worry, I'm going to send the recording to everyone who registered. And secondly, if you have any questions, please direct those to the Q&A portion of the platform. If we have time, we'll get to those. If not, I will follow up with an email to try to address any questions that you have. With that, I am really excited to again be joined by two amazing Emory thought leaders. And I'm excited to introduce Dr. Jill Perry-Smith, Professor of Organization and Management and Senior Associate Dean for Strategic Initiatives with Goizueta Business School at Emory. Joining her is Dr. Shannon Clute, Director of the Hatchery, which is under the Emory Center for Innovation. Thank you both so much for being here. They have great expertise that complements and contrasts each other from time to time. So excited to get that conversation started. So as I just mentioned, we have had a lot of time for reflection and revaluing what we do in our work and prioritizing what we want to do. Shannon, can you tell us a little bit about the work that you've done looking at the acceleration around work dissatisfaction with traditional career tracks? And tell us a little bit about what you've learned with that research.
Sure. So in the last year, there's been a lot of media attention given to what the New York Times has dubbed the YOLO economy, which is an acronym for You Only Live Once, where many workers, and especially millennials, are experiencing less certainty that traditional careers will help them reach their goals. And these doubts have combined with the uncertainties of the pandemic and current job trends to really increase their risk tolerance. And so we're seeing two trends, I think, come out of that. The first, there seems to be a trend towards job searching and career switching. And the second is that there seem to be many millennials in particular who are simply dropping out of the workforce to enjoy life while pandemic aid and sort of relief programs are at a high, and when they feel that they may as well take a risk. So that latter trend is what's being referred to as the Great Resignation. And to date, honestly, I've not seen a lot of solid research about the numbers of people involved or sorting these two trends out cleanly. But in 2020, it's interesting to note that new business applications were up 25% from 2019. So it seems that one of the outcomes is that all this uncertainty is spurring more entrepreneurship. And this probably shouldn't be a surprise because it goes hand in hand with another trend, which is that studies show somewhere between 50 and 70% of Gen Zers state that entrepreneurship is their intended career path, and they plan to own their own business. So, you know, that's a huge number, and it's unlikely we'll ever see that play out in actuality. But there's no doubt that we're in for a really massive disruption of traditional business and employment models. And what I can say from firsthand work at the Hatchery is that this generation is highly entrepreneurial. I'm willing to bet that I've worked with as many students who have founded nonprofits as have worked for them. So they're building out their skills by doing. by actually practicing and starting, which is why I think a location like the hatchery is ultimately so important to empower today's young learners. And I'll also say that many students come to us asking how they can use innovation process, not only to start a business, but to define and prototype the sorts of professional outcomes that they're interested in achieving. And recently we hosted an immersive 2-evening workshop in human-centered design that was taught by an Emory alumna and ex-employee of Google. And she started by helping participants understand what makes for a good challenge statement for a workshop. And the challenge they selected was focused on how they could leverage their disciplinary training to work in a different field, which is pretty remarkable if you think about this, because this was a half undergraduate, half graduate audience, many of them in their final year of studies. And the question that was top of mind for them was, how do they change careers? So I do think that we're definitely in for some real changes, and that those are likely to accelerate in the future. Lane, I'm sorry, you're muted.
Sorry about that, double hit it. I was just saying, commenting on what you were sharing, it sounds like you're cross-training for a sport that you really haven't even jumped into.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting that students are looking for that. So working parents, and especially moms, have been tasked with various degrees of homeschooling in addition to running their full-time jobs. And that has led to total blurring of boundaries between work and family. Dr. Perry Smith, can you tell us a little bit about your research on family experiences in relation to work engagement?
Sure. So we know that we don't leave our family identity and our family role at the door when we begin working. And this became apparent to me when I first started working in corporate America. I worked for Exxon after getting my MBA. And at the time, in my particular unit or department, it became quickly clear that I was one of a few single childless workers. Most of the other workers were parents and had a nuclear family. And I noticed that assumptions and policies were geared specifically to that category of workers, those who were parents and had nuclear families at home. And so that's when I first began to wonder, how is it that our family identity or family structure influences our experiences at work? And so fast forward, to getting my PhD and engaging in this research, and for the past 20 years, I've been very interested in this question. How does our non-work and family identity inform what happens at work? In a recent project that I think is most relevant to our conversation here, we studied the extent that single childless workers versus those who were parents were fully absorbed and engaged while working. And by that, we mean the extent individuals are psychologically present, giving their full mental energies to solving the difficult problems that arise at work. And so interestingly, in this work, we found that single childless workers were less absorbed, less concentrated while working than those with families. And this is in contrast to this expectation that those with families or who are parents may be distracted while working and may be less absorbed. We found the opposite, that those who were parents and had families were the most absorbed. What is particularly interesting, I think, is why. So single workers, we found, tended to anticipate more leisure activities after work. And so this creates a clear and compelling contrast, essentially, between what we think we're going to do after work versus what we're doing while working. And so that's a distraction. Those who are parents or part of a nuclear family at home anticipated more domestic activities after work, which you might think is problematic. But what we found is the contrast between what's going to happen after work and what happens while we're working is less compelling. So then we're more absorbed, we're more focused, etc. And when you think about knowledge workers, our core contribution is our ability to think, solve problems, engage in ways that otherwise would not be possible. So this notion that those who are parents, who have spouses, are more absorbed and engaged is a quite striking finding, we think.
Thank you so much. So counter to the dissatisfaction around traditional career tracks that Shannon had just mentioned, could you share a little bit about your research on how traditional work structures may be actually providing a benefit that we're not even aware of?
Yeah, so one of the implications of the work that I just described is that having a clear demarcation between working and not working is beneficial, that we're more absorbed, we're more engaged, we're able to solve those difficult problems. And so in some ways, we can envision that as a very traditional structure where we have kind of work time and we have non-work time. In many ways, I think there's a push against that traditional kind of structure. And I think it speaks to this idea that sometimes we don't know what we need. We know what we want and we know what we like, but we don't necessarily know what's optimal or what's required. And so, those of us who engage with social psychology and psychological processes, think of this phenomenon as people are stupid. Like, we think we know what's good for us, but we don't in all cases know what we need. And so the interesting thing about the research that I described in our current world is thinking about ways that having a clear demarcation between work and non-work is beneficial. And perhaps, the very traditional rigid structure where we have this, work time from 9 to 5 and then non-work time, maybe that's not the ideal, but there's some ideal where this clear demarcation allows us to be absorbed and focused and is actually beneficial, not just for our work contributions, but for our well-being as well. So bottom line, some aspects of what we consider to be very traditional work structures have clear benefits.
And Dr. Perry-Smith, I wonder if I could follow up quickly, because there were a couple of things you said that were interesting. One, the question of how parents saw a less clear and compelling differentiation between their work activities and their home activities or leisure activities, and that was a motivator at work. It's interesting as a working parent. It may be a motivator at work, but it does make you wonder about where you find the joy of the leisure activity. But the real question I had is, given the current work situation of the pandemic, where increasingly working parents are having to manage really competing priorities and a lot of parenting while working, is it too early to say if there's a trend of maybe reversing some of the advantages of the traditional work structure, and especially the advantages of that work structure for parents? Is there any emerging research that might suggest, for example, that advantage of being a parent in a new environment sort of disappears, or is it too early to say?
It's a great question. I think it's too early to say. I think the research hasn't caught up with that reality. What I hear in conversation with parents and experience it myself as a parent is, individuals searching for ways to have that structure and clear boundary between work and home, where in sort of pre-pandemic times or earlier times, that boundary was provided by going to work. We're leaving the home, we're going to work, and that boundary is clear and there for us. That boundary allows us opportunities to kind of transition from one role to the next role, which is really, I think, very beneficial for us from a psychological perspective. So in conversation, I hear a lot of sort of individual creativity applied to how can I create some sort of boundary or structure and still leverage kind of the beauty and the benefit of this flexibility and fluidity that I now can have between my work and my home.
That's great. I love how Dr. Perry Smith, you were saying sometimes we don't know what we need, but we know what we want. I feel like that is sort of the monster that's emerged in a lot of our worlds right now. We just want to do what we want and maybe not pay too much attention to what we need. But Shannon, can you talk to us a little bit about, you work with students and some Emory alums and really do a great job of helping them navigate and identify a process to help them either do a career transition or identify for students what kind of career to go into. Can you tell us a little bit about that process and how you're helping people navigate their wants and needs?
Sure. So I think the example I gave previously of helping students sort of focus on questions of working in a different career than the one their studies prepared them for is one great example of the sorts of bigger questions of the innovating oneself and one's outcomes that come up often as we work with students. Thankfully, as a humanities PhD myself, who has run innovation programs in a Fortune 50 and has transitioned to industries and careers several times, these are the kinds of questions that I enjoy working with. And I would say the same is true for our innovation programming and operations manager, Ben Garrett, who actually holds an MDiv, but has worked primarily in innovation to empower everything from community organizing to nonprofit development and commercial startups. So we really try to help students understand that innovation process is not just synonymous with entrepreneurship, though that is one of the really important pathways that innovation can take. The innovation work is fundamentally process work, and innovation processes can be used to improve virtually anything iteratively over time and with increasingly controllable risk. So in that sense, innovation process can and probably should be used or be applied to things like changing careers. You can apply sort of high-level process like human-centered design to empathizing with the end user's professional challenge, even if that end user is you, and doing good problem definition work and eventually ideating, prototyping, and testing alternative solutions. We also borrow from lean startup methods a lot at the Hatchery, which are great for tackling questions of like problem solution fit. And offer simple tools like a value proposition canvas. So one side of a valued proposition canvas focuses on the consumer's job to be done. That is the thing they're trying to solve for, and the pains that will be eliminated and the gains that will be created if that job is done and the right solution is found. And then on the other side of the canvas, you propose a solution and you examine the gains that solution creates and the pains it relieves. And if the problem side jobs to be done aligns well with the solution side, pain relief and gain creation, you probably have a good problem solution fit. So this was a tool that was created to help startups look at whether their proposed product or service met a consumer need. But it really works just as well for exploring various challenges in one's life, including professional challenges. So think about it this way. If you were to start a job search, you could describe your current bad job situation as a job to be done, and a problem to be solved for, and the right job as a solution. And that would be sort of a dream scenario way of using this, this canvas. Or maybe more practically, you could consider the hiring companies posting it as a need they have, their job to be done, and yourself as the potential solution to their needs. And if you could use that worksheet and see a good fit for your skills and solving of their pains and creating gains for them, you can probably create a really strong application for that post.
Thank you so much. It's a super valuable process for students to learn and adults alike. So with so much of our work taking a greater place in our digital world, many of us have lost exposure to people outside of our pods, as I'm calling it. We usually had 2 to 3 people before vaccinations when we were in lockdown that we were able to fraternize with and visit with, but that was a very small group. Beyond that, could you both share a little bit of your insights on how creativity and social networks are created and connected, and what this digital world means for that as an impact? Dr.
I'll
Grayson?
start. I'll start. So another line of my research focuses on creativity, collaboration, and these informal relationships and social networks. And from that work, we know that chance conversations with strangers, acquaintances, people we don't know well, the so-called weaker ties, are really important for stimulating creative thinking and generating new ideas. And so when we think about this quandary of figuring out either a new career path or a new way of working, it really requires coming up with solutions that previously have not existed. And so if you imagine that we are focused or exposed less to people outside of your pod, if you will, or people that we don't know well, or people at the proverbial water cooler, we're missing the opportunity to exchange with people that we don't know, who are the best source of new ideas and insights. The other part of my research that I am always delighted to talk about, because I think it's fascinating, is not only do we get new perspectives and ideas from these casual people that we don't know well, but we also pay more attention to the insights and ideas we get from people that we don't know well, particularly when those insights are novel. So you can imagine the power of both getting exposed to different perspectives and ideas, and then also paying attention to those ideas that could have when it comes to thinking of new career trajectories or figuring out how to work in a different way and proposing that solution at work. Just the other day, I had the delight of going to an in-person meeting, and half of the participants I didn't know well. And at the conclusion of the formal meeting, those who Zoomed in got off Zoom, and I assume, went on about their day. Before leaving, I chatted for a few minutes with one of the participants that I didn't know well as we were heading out. And that sparked one of the most creative ideas and different ways of thinking about a core problem that I think about, which is how to attract more diverse faculty to the business school. And so that chance casual interaction with someone I didn't know well was very stimulating when it came to a new idea or a new perspective that, had we been in the pure Zoom world, I would not have had the opportunity to experience. If I had a problem, I would have gone to people that I know well, that I interact with a lot, and gotten ideas in that way. So, we have to think about ways of creating those kinds of social spaces so we get that casual collaboration and exposure that can help us solve these work-life challenges that we're currently experiencing.
Well, this is much more Dr. Perry Smith's field of expertise than mine, but I can certainly speak to it anecdotally with some of what we've done and seen here at the Hatchery. I'll also note on this question of spaces that an area of interest of mine, I'm sort of an amateur sleuth when it comes to architecture, and I've always been fascinated by kind of communal third spaces and the extent to which they've really disappeared from American life in the last half century. And that is one, I think, important factor for needing to find other places for kind of happenstance and kismet. Because as those spaces decline, we need to find substitutes. I'll say that I've been really surprised by the extent to which collaboration and creativity seem to go hand in hand for the students we serve at the Hatchery. So collaboration is truly a cornerstone of innovation work. Though as a culture, we tend to be enamored of the myth of the lone wolf innovator, which is usually just that. It's usually a myth. When Steve Jobs was asked what accomplishment in his career he was most proud of, he said the teams we built. And so we've taken a very collaborative approach to working with students to build the innovation center they want. I would say that if I had to characterize that approach, we've been responsive by design. And one of the real surprises for us has been the volume and diversity of art supplies that students have requested in the makerspace of an innovation and entrepreneurship center. So whenever we have a materials request, I follow up to see what else I can learn. And the students who have been making these requests have consistently told us that their first step as they're working on a new innovation is just to get something out there in a physical form and decide if there's a there, so to speak, that's even worth pursuing further. And they've also indicated that having those sorts of supplies handy allows them to work with others more collaboratively at an earlier stage when things are still largely conceptual. So at least anecdotally, there does seem to be a real connection between innovation, creativity, and collaboration, as we've seen here at the Hatchery.
That's fascinating. Another follow-up question I'd love to know from both of you. Have either of your experiences or research shown any correlation between personality types? If people think they're extroverts versus introverts, are they more drawn to these third spaces, or are they more likely to reach out to people in a room, like you were saying, Dr. Perry Smith? I don't know if you consider yourself an extrovert or if, you know, kind of outgoing, but would a shy person have had that same kind of exchange and creativity spark? But I just wonder from both of you if personality and, you know, kind of working types have bubbled up anything particularly interesting.
So, you know, despite what you may think, I mean, we don't see a strong association between personality traits such as introversion and extroversion and creativity. There are certain personality traits that are very strongly related to creativity. One is openness to experience, which is, you know, separate or distinct from the extent one is interested in or seeks or gets energy from talking to others. The nice thing I think about focusing on these kind of stranger acquaintances or weaker ties is these are the kinds of relationships that are very suitable and comfortable for those who are not as extroverted as others, right? These don't necessarily require, you know, extensive socializing or schmoozing, if you will, in order to get these insights. We do know something about the personality trait called social monitoring. These are the individuals that are attuned to social cues, can read others really well and adapt their kind of presentation and behavior to others. We do know that these individuals do have certain kinds of social networks that we think are beneficial to creativity. But from the perspective of, you know, engaging in these more casual kinds of conversations or discussions, I think that's wide open to a variety of different personality types.
Mm-hmm. And I would add that we've seen that it's really necessary to program a wide array of sort of instructional designs. So even if the content can be similar, it's useful to offer similar content through a lens of small collaborative cohorts, big lecture halls, things where students take the lead in making the presentations themselves, because people's styles can really vary, and the way that they best plug into conversations or questions can really vary. But there's really only one truism of innovation work, which I think is worth mentioning in this context. You know, there have been a lot of studies of innovation. A lot of them have been disproven over time. One thing that seems to be almost universally true is that the more diverse the inputs, the better the outcomes. And that's not just demographic diversity, it's diversity of industry, it's different skill sets, it's diverse training that people come to a problem with, it's different desires for what you want to get out of the experience of collaborating and innovating. And the more diverse those teams you bring together, generally speaking, the higher the likelihood that they'll achieve an outcome that can be adopted. So that seems to bode for this idea that collaboration and creative approaches need to be encouraged. But I don't know that there's an easy correlation between a personality type and positive outcomes. I think it's more a plurality of types. And if we can create the opportunities to bring more people in, I think we'll see better outcomes.
Great, thank you so much. And follow up to that, we actually had a question that has come in recently that is following up on that too. But when you're talking about having diverse inputs come in our earlier conversation, we talked a little bit about what are the tools you need to have in place to manage those the best. If either one of you want to speak to a little bit of, how do you want to embrace the diversity to have, as much input and diversity of thought and creation as possible. But what do you do from there? What kind of tools could you share that would be helpful for people to do in their work, use in their workplace?
Sure. Well, I can jump in if that's all right. I would say that these innovation processes I've been speaking to are a good place to start because, first of all, staying process focused can help short circuit, I think, some of the questions that can derail a conversation up front. We're not focused on outcomes. We're focused first and foremost on really understanding, it's called empathy work. And so understanding the needs of that end user from their perspective, and that can help you set aside a lot of other preconceptions and really focus on that end user. And then to go from there to careful problem definition work to really try to define the problem from that person's perspective. And only after that do you start getting to ideating, prototyping, or testing. And so you've heard me speak a few times about this process, and this is human-centered design. There are lots of processes out there that are very useful. There's Agile, which is often used in tech or software situations. There's Lean Startup, which is often used in sort of entrepreneurship startup situations. Personally, I'm a big component or a proponent of human-centered design because it really does put the human need at the center of the equation. And if you start from there, I find that it sort of facilitates a lot of the downstream activity.
Yeah, I would add, one caution with the general idea that, assembling people with diverse perspectives or diverse backgrounds can facilitate, this creative innovation process is I think we have to be careful about what stage of this process we're talking about. So for some stages, if we're thinking about teams, for example, some of the research suggests that teams have a lot of difficulty leveraging the diversity that may exist among team members. Sometimes we see individuals aren't able to kind of fully understand different perspectives, integrate those different perspectives, and listen to come up with, these highly desirable and good ideas. So we have to think of ways of leveraging these different perspectives in the context of, the social dynamics that happen that can cause the team to not do well. So one, very easy intervention that works at the generation stage is generating ideas individually, and then sharing those ideas once they've been generated by each individual with the entire team. Because otherwise what happens is we see individuals being concerned about being evaluated by other team members, being not understood, following along with trends of what has been generated previously. So I think thinking carefully about at what point do we collaborate simultaneously versus work individually across the entire journey of generating ideas to implementation is really important.
That's great. Thank you both so much. This has been a great conversation. I'm excited to hear a little bit of feedback from our attendees later on. I did want to just kind of close with hearing a little bit from Dr. Perry Smith on the research you're conducting right now and any way that attendees could participate in a survey. And then Shannon, if you could close us out with a little bit about how people can get in touch with you at the Hatchery, and we'll go from there.
Thank you. So I've talked about a couple of my research projects, and I have a great opportunity for you as participants to get involved in research in a very easy way. And that is, I have a current project that involves participating in a survey, completing a short survey, and we'll be sending out that link after the session. And so if you've been intrigued about how do we come up with these conclusions, if you want to engage with Emory in a different and easy way, please look for that survey link and participate. And we'll see what new insights we get from your contributions.
Sure. And at the hatchery, I would mention that the first year of operations for us were largely about really learning the internal landscape and making the right partnerships to make sure that we were doing all we could to be a resource to folks across the university. And in the last few months, we've really been trying to expand our focus to encourage and generate more industry and outside partnerships and alumni partnerships. And we would love to be a place where alumni can easily sort of connect with current student innovators and entrepreneurs, whether that's in a sort of speaking capacity, which is one very turnkey way to get involved. And we have a couple of podcast series, whether it's in a sort of student mentorship capacity, or eventually even developing sort of personal mentorship or externship opportunities through your own businesses. So we are in the process of working with Sarah Rawls at Alumni Affairs to set up a time next month when we're going to bring together alumni and some current student innovators to do a discovery session about what would be the easy next steps in starting to create some of these touch points. And you can also, if you have questions about the hatchery or ways or recommendations, we'd love to hear from you. We're the hatchery@emory.edu is our email address.
Great, thank you so much. We'll be sending that survey and also the follow-up for the discovery opportunity at the hatchery with an email to everyone who registered. And with that, I want to thank everybody for joining us. Thank you to Dr. Jill Perry-Smith and Dr. Shannon Clute, and wishing you the best in your work search, and hope you have a great rest of your week. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.